Okay, so I don't know whether I'm the only conceptual artist on this panel, but maybe that's a sort of responsibility that I'm not really ready to take on. But like many of my fellow conceptual artists, I consider myself to be a bit of a jack of all trades, as the slide suggests, and consequently, unfortunately, an expert at none of them, and certainly not an expert at economics. So this might turn out to be more, I think, what artists can learn from economics talk rather than what artists can essentially teach economics. But I've only got 5 minutes, so what I'm going to do is whiz through a few slides of some work that I've been making over the course of the first few years. But before I get sidetracked by that, I thought I should address the actual question which Cecilia gave us all, which is what artists can teach economists. So, the few things that I've come up with all quite interestingly relate to artists' lifestyles rather than the content of artists' work, which probably chimes with what Ruth was saying. So I think that artists are particularly good at being motivated by things other than profit. They're very good at adapting to change. They're quite opportunistic. I don't know whether this is necessarily a good thing, but they're also fundamentally very good at being thrifty. And I think that artists have, through necessity, developed skills and techniques for living well on very few resources. I certainly have. And I think this is something that we shouldn't underestimate. But unfortunately, and this is something that I think it might be interesting to discuss later, these techniques are often heavily reliant on the welfare state. So I'm quite interested in knowing what would happen if everyone embraced the artistic lifestyle, and if we all kind of got into the habit of this sort of thrifty living, where it becomes more about hand-to-mouth mentality, where there is no prioritisation of financial growth. So I'd be interested to discuss whether we could all live like that, or whether we're only a few of us, these people that choose the creative lifestyle, are able to do that because there's so many other people who are buying into the system and essentially bankrolling us by creating these successive profits. So what would happen, if there was no growth? Would the welfare state disappear? What would happen to the low-income lifestyle if that happened? I don't know the answers to these questions, but I think they're important, and it would be good to talk about them later. So I just wanted to start with a small bit of history about my adopted home of Glasgow. At Glasgow International Festival of Live Art, which had just finished, an artist called Ruth presented an exhibition which told the history of the socialist Sunday school movement in Glasgow, but also throughout the UK, which began in the late 19th century and then carried on through the 60s, 70s and 80s. And behind the initiative was this bold and sensible idea that there should be an alternative to the religious education that was being offered in more conventional Sunday schools, which in Glasgow particularly was obviously helping to fuel sectarian divides, which are still going on today. But the emphasis of the socialist Sunday school movement was on teaching economics and Marxist history and class consciousness to primary school children. Ambitious, maybe, in today's terms, but I like the idea, the fundamental idea that these schools were trying to enable children to grow up with an inherent awareness of the impact that the economic system they're born into has on all different aspects of their lives, so the way that they work, the way that they live, the way that they socialise, even the way that they think, so that they could feel empowered when they grow up to rise up and attempt to change it, and hence the maxim of the schools, which was, "Thou shalt teach the revolution." Now, unfortunately, I was born in 1979 in suburbia and grew up in Thatcher's Britain, where these sorts of educational establishments were no longer being championed. And as a result, it took me until I was nearly 30, when I moved to Glasgow myself, to undergo a similar process of enlightenment. And I don't think it's any coincidence that this when I moved to Glasgow, it was also 2008, which was the beginning of the major financial crisis that we're in at the moment. And it was then that I began to question what the benefits of this capitalist system actually were, and to notice a lot of the negative side effects. So this realisation had a massive consequence on almost everything in my life, and it made me question what on earth I was doing trying to pursue this career as an artist, and how on earth could I actually continue making art. So I decided that if I was going to continue making art and to continue to try to communicate through the medium of art, then if I was going to say something, then I may as well say something important. So I began to make artworks which were trying to demystify the economic system, to try to visualise this thing that is essentially invisible but omnipresent in all our lives. So this work, Vending Machine, tries to make literal the connection between food supplies and financial crisis by being reprogrammed only to vend out packets of crisps when news relating to the recession comes up in the BBC News feed. And then an installation from last year, where I tried to visualise the very boring sounding topic, public service policy, through the medium of massage chairs. So this circle of massage chairs, there's 6 of them representing health, railways, gas, electricity, post and telecoms, all things that over the course of the last century have fluctuated between public and private ownership, and they would switch on and off at the points in the century when they went between private and public ownership. And this other installation from towards the end of last year, which attempted to make visible the correlation between public spending and instances of social unrest, particularly rioting, austerity and anarchy. And it's a kind of homage to Anthony McCall's line describing a cone, and the cone grows and shrinks dependent on the size of government spending in that year. So, as well as making these kind of installations in traditional exhibition contexts which aim to illuminate some of these invisible aspects of the system of free market capitalism, I've also tried to use my time and energy to create these projects which attempt to reverse some of the negative side effects that we all know free market capitalism has, specifically creating heightened levels of competition and atomising us as individuals. So the Artist Lottery Syndicate came together in 2010 to attempt to hit the jackpot. It was motivated by the definition of a syndicate as being a group of people coming together for a common cause. And it attempted to sort of undermine the winner-takes-all mentality, or the winner-takes-all economy, which is the central driving force of the art world. And this moved into a project which Cecilia touched on, which was called the Artist Bond, which is another sort of speculative funding scheme, which attempts to make money for artists. And again, we've hijacked the "we're all in this together" slogan. This is a lifelong project. I'm interested in the concept of a lifelong project because capitalism, another impulse of capitalism is to really focus on the short term. So I'm interested in what it means to set something up that will potentially go on for the rest of my life. And over the course of the year, over the course of that period of time, it expands so that up to 1,000 artists can join. And once we're all joined together, then we really are all in this together. Because if we win, and we're actually just playing the premium ones, there's nothing particularly clever about it. But if we do win, we all win, and we get to share the money. So just to conclude, I don't quite know what artists can teach economists, but I think there's definitely something about... I think both economists and artists and everybody else need to relearn the importance of thinking critically about the world that we live in, to change our value systems. And we should all, artists and economists and everybody else, think about creating frameworks, think about creating systems which aim to bring people together rather than pitting us against each other.